Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be exploring the theme of athlete transition into coaching. My name is Chris Winter, and I'm a former national team athlete now working at BC Athletics as their technical manager for track and field, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin here, let's just go through a quick agenda for the day. I'll begin with just a few housekeeping notes. Then I'll go into introducing our coaching panel for the day. And then for the next 30 or 40 minutes, I'll be asking a series of questions to our panelists on the topic of athlete transition into coaching. And then we'll leave about 15 or so minutes at the end for questions from the audience. Those housekeeping notes, your mics have all been muted and you're not able to come off of mute, but you are able to ask questions using the dialog box, and we'll try to answer as many of those during our last 15 minutes or so. If you're having any technical difficulties, please also let us know using that same dialog box, and we'll see what we can do to assist. Also note that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Athletics Canada website under Coaching Education under the e-learning tab. The webinar is scheduled to last 60 minutes, and we'll do our best to stick to that. Okay, so just begin by introducing our panelists for the day. First one is Jamie Sinclair. Jamie is the lead sprints and pole vault coach at Trinity Western University in Langley, BC. Hailing from Glasgow, Scotland, Jamie graduated with a degree in human kinetics from Trinity Western in 2016 after competing with the Spartans track and field team for 4 years. He was a 3-time Canada West medalist in pole vault and helped Trinity's 4x200 meter team to 2 Canada West medals. Jamie has also completed a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Glasgow in 2012 before moving to Canada, and is an NCCP performance certified sprints hurdles coach. Next is Hilary Stellingworth. Hilary is the new head coach of the men's and women's cross country and track teams at the University of Victoria, after having served as the interim coach for the 2019-2020 season and assistant coach for 6 years prior to that. Hilary recently served as a national team coach for the Pan Am Cross Country Championships in March and did an apprenticeship with the Athletics Canada West Hub based in Victoria. Hilary is an accomplished national team athlete. She's a 2-time Olympian, an Olympic finalist in the women's 1500. She's also competed for Canada on 11 different national teams, including World Cross Country, the World Athletics Championships, Commonwealth Games, and Pan Am Games. She's also a former NCAA All-American at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Also joining us today is Kurt Downs. He's the head coach of Border City Athletics Club. He has served as a national team event coach of a diverse group of athletes across the sprints, hurdles, middle distance, and jumps groups, and works with a range of athletes and abilities from the youth through to international level athletes, including Canada's 800-meter record holder, Olympian Brandon McBride. In 2019, Kurt was also named Athletics Canada's Coach of the Year. Last coach in our panelists is Charles Allen. Charles Allen is the high-performance sprint coach at Athletics Canada's East Hub in Toronto. Charles achieved a master's degree at Clemson University, while he self-coached himself to the 2004 Olympic finals in the 110-meter hurdles. Charles, a 2-time Olympian himself, currently coaches Canada's top female sprinter, Olympian and NACAC Pan Am medalist, and Canadian record holder in the 200 meters, Crystal Emmanuel. So thank you to all 4 of you for joining us today and giving us your time and your thoughts as we explore this idea of transitioning from being an athlete into that coaching world and some of the trials and tribulations along the way. So we'll hop right into our series of questions here. And just begin by having you guys each tell us a little bit about your athletics background, where you first got involved in athletics, and tell us a little bit about your athletics experience as an athlete first. So maybe Charles, have you been here for us?
Okay. Wow. I think back really hard. So in high school, I tried basketball and quickly learned that, not everybody run back and play defense. So it didn't do well. And then I tried volleyball. I didn't really know a whole lot about volleyball, so I got cut from that team. And ended up trying out for the track team and quickly learned that, this was an individual type sport based on your individual effort. And, once you go out there and you put everything on the line and whatever the outcome is, you can live with that. And I gravitated towards that. So in high school, I kind of started up getting involved with track and field, joined the Brampton Track Club, and worked as hard as I could, and got a scholarship, achieved a scholarship to go to Clemson University in the States, and spent, 9 years in South Carolina. And, did well there, did my thing. Team did well, and onward, wanted to continue post-collegiate in this wonderful sport, track and field. But I had to, I guess, get good enough in an event in which I know I could do or compete in internationally. That ended up being the 110-meter hurdles, because I did just about everything at school. They called me the utility man. I did the 100, 400, 200, the 4x1, the 4x4, and then the hurdles. So I pushed forward with the hurdles, and made my way to some international status, and you know what happened after that. Few Olympics, few Worlds, and did well enough to eventually find my way here.
That's great. Over to you, Jamie. Just a little bio. Introduce yourself to the group here today.
Okay. Yeah, I started in track very young. I wasn't one of those kids who did a lot of sports growing up, which was pretty unfortunate now that we hear about the benefits of not specializing early. But my dad was a track guy, so when I was 9 years old, or when I was 8 years old, I was already at the club and kind of getting in the way and running around there and stuff. And then when I was 9, I finally joined, and kind of from there, I didn't. Well, it was probably a short time during my teenage years that I played a little bit of soccer and stuff, and avoided going to track practice. I kind of wasn't as in love with it for a short time there, and then just as all kids do, all different events until I was around 15, and then I discovered the pole vault, and then just totally fell in love with that event, and that's kind of what brought me to Canada. I continued to pole vault from 15, and then when I was 22, when I graduated from university in Glasgow, I was kind of in this no man's land of not being, I guess, kind of being an average athlete at that point. I wasn't having offers from NCAA schools, and it wasn't an obvious decision for me to keep going in track. So I was thinking about getting into a job with engineering at that point, and then I did get an offer from Trinity Western to come out here and train and compete. And at that point, even though I'd kind of got over the delusions of maybe when I was younger, hoping to be an Olympian, I just realized I still love this sport and I would love to have more years in it. So without much hesitation, came to Canada, competed for Trinity Western, and actually began sprinting quite a bit more out here, and graduated in 2016, did a couple of jobs, and then got the chance about a year and a half later to come back and start coaching.
That's great. Okay, thank you for that. Hilary, are you able to give us a little introduction on yourself?
Sure. I played a lot of different sports at a young age, and all the way through to high school. In high school, I focused on soccer and track, and I had ups and downs in both. I didn't make my high school cross country team in grade 9, so I played soccer, and I don't think I made it to OFSA till grade 11. So I had maybe a later start to track, but then had a pretty quick progression in high school, given the opportunity in the OFSA system to go through rounds and learn how to race. And then I got the opportunity to go on a scholarship to the University of Wisconsin, and I ran 4 years there. And then I ran an Olympic trials, my first Olympic trials in 04, and decided I wanted to continue on. I was 5th place there and thought, like, okay, well, let's give it another 4 years and see what happens. So that lasted 12 more years. So I did 2 Olympics and actually made my first Olympic team at the age of 31. So late to everything, I guess, late to track in high school and late to qualifying for major Olympic team. But just in all of that, you learn from those experiences. You learn how to lose and how to win, and how to be resilient. And so I think I valued all of that in my athletic experience. I learned how to come back from a baby. So in all of those, it allows you to value what athletics can bring to your life and the person that it helps you develop to be. So that's where, coming into coaching and giving back comes in.
That's great, and we'll definitely get into those different experiences and that you've all had, and how they relate and how they attribute to you being a coach now. So that's great. Thanks, Hilary. And Kurt, just to you to provide a quick introduction to the group on your past.
Sure. I guess mine was a little bit different. I started athletics, track and field, in maybe the 6th grade, doing it competitively. I used to compete for North York Track Club years ago in Toronto. I was a high jumper with Gary Lubin, same guy that found Mark, high jumper, former Canadian record holder. And I high jumped, sprinted, that sort of stuff, through to going to high school. I went to the same high school as Justin Knight did, same group of coaches. And scholarships were slim, very small schools, not quite full. And so I kind of floated around with that idea a little bit. I ended up down here in Windsor, competed for a few years in the sprints, then moved over to the jumps. I was fooling around in track and field PTA, and I think I jumped something that would have put me on the podium in triple jump for U Sport or CIS back then. And I started jumping. So we also competed in the NAIA. So I was fortunate enough to be All-American in the NAIA as well. And yeah, after that, and that's pretty much it. Found my way into coaching, I guess.
That's great, and a good segue there to really that next question, and I'll go through all of you to kind of get your own view on this, is whether or not during your athletic career, whether or not you kind of always had it in the back of your mind that you wanted to be a coach. And I assume that probably all athletes at some point have a thought about it. For some people, it seems like a natural calling and something that they always kind of gear their life to, whereas other people seem to kind of stumble into it. So curious to hear from each of you in terms of how you found coaching and what was the process behind that. So maybe back to you, Charles, to kind of talk a bit about how you found coaching.
So in my international experience, I found myself always, I guess, not really having the support that I needed to give my best performance at those times when you needed to have your best, and just started to figure out things for myself, and started to acquire the personnel that I know that I can work with, that could assist me through. And just over the years, just starting to realize that we were missing so much. That we had athletes who were talented, who can get out there and perform, but we just needed to have more at that level, whether it's the experience, insight, and just tons of support. I think the funding was obviously there. It hasn't changed. Well, it has changed, but it's still not enough, if you will. But like having an IST team that you're familiar with and stuff like that. That stuff has grown over the years. So for me, it's realizing that, what, I want to make a difference. A difference with the Canadian athletes going forward, a difference with getting Canada on the map more and more, because I believe that we have the athletes, we have the resources to get out there and perform on that level. So what I gained from my experience, I knew that I needed to pass that on. And in wanting to do that, it would improve things going forward for athletes, for our country, and so forth. So I just felt, based on what I gained in my opportunities, that it was just going to be a matter of time. So as I, kind of neared the end of my career athletically, I didn't retire because I wanted to. I couldn't maintain my funding, so I had to exit, if you will. But I took a couple years, just making sure that it was out of my system and I was finished being an athlete. And thereafter, just realizing that, okay, it's time to get back into it. And I just started from the club level, just assisting and then volunteering, and then eventually things moved from there. But I'll leave it at that. I kind of, through my experience internationally, knew that I needed to give back based on what I gained, what I learned.
Just clarifying, there was a couple-year period there where you were out of the sport completely, both as an athlete, as a coach, and then you came back as a coach?
Correct, completely. I just needed to know that, well, I wanted to be normal. Just
Normal.
Yeah. If you will, and just transition into a bit of work. And I was removed. You couldn't ask me anything about track, I couldn't tell you, or sports in general. I removed myself just to make sure that I was good moving on. So I was still young, 30, 31, still young.
Oh, that's great. Okay, Jamie, over to you. What was your experience in terms of coaching, and was it something you always kind of envisioned, or how did you get involved and find it?
Yeah, at the beginning, like I said, I guess how most kids are and how they should be. I was pretty delusional, I guess, when I was young. Like I had these lofty goals of becoming an Olympian and stuff like that. And again, I think that's good for kids to have those goals. But because of that, no part of me ever really thought too much about coaching. I actually did it. I started coaching from a very young age, but it was more just a summer job. Like in Glasgow, there was a pretty good summer camp program with track and field, so it was just a way to make money. Like I think when I was 15, I did my level 1 UKA coaching certification, and the level 2 just because it got me a couple pound more every hour. But there was no real desire to go into coaching from there. And then as I kind of went through my own athletic career, there was quite a few coaching changes. As everyone did in Glasgow, you went to the club that you were close to geographically, and you just trained with those coaches. And then as I moved into pole vault, there was one coach in Glasgow for pole vault, so you moved to there. And then after that point, for different reasons, I moved between coaches, and I started to notice, this coach does this thing a different way, and I started to become very curious why we train different ways. And I guess that's kind of where it all began. And then when I realized I wasn't going to meet the kind of standards I'd set for myself as an athlete, it became kind of a logical step to move into a position that could help other people try and achieve their goals. Yeah, that's where, and from like my final years of university, I guess I might get in trouble for talking about this. I guess you're not allowed to talk about religion and these sort of things, but when I was at Trinity, that's when I became a Christian. And through that early part of my kind of development as a Christian, it was so intertwined with track that when I left track, the thing where I had most of my passion and I kind of learned to know God, that kind of disappeared. So through doing some other jobs and realizing I don't really have a huge passion to sit at a desk, and I was doing a little bit of engineering related stuff for a while, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really have a passion to sit here for 40 hours and draw floor plans. And it just became obvious to me I need to be somewhere, something that I really love, and it's not a challenge for me to get out of bed in the morning and go and do it. So yeah, it was a no-brainer for me to, at that point, to try and get into coaching.
No, that's great. And there's a couple of really good themes you had in there. The one that stood out, and I'm interested with our other coaching panel here, is just whether there's this awareness and keen interest in the coaching principles and the training philosophies, even from a young age. And it's not the case with all athletes. And you pulled it out there that was something that you found interesting and kind of stuck in your mind from an early age. So that's interesting. Hilary, over to you.
Yeah, Jamie hit on something that made me think that I think often what brings us to coaching is how much we just love being at the track, and whether that be as an athlete training, but also just figuring out what works for each individual athlete and putting together training programs and trial and error, right? We're going to make mistakes, but we're also going to see some neat things. And so, yeah, I think that's what started is I love this sport, and I've always been a student of the sport. I've had the opportunity to live in different countries and be under different coaches. And I trained in Ethiopia for a while, and trained in Switzerland when we lived there, and with different coaches, and have always been interested in what they're doing and why, and what I'm doing and what works for me. So I've kind of studied that, but really came to coaching through teaching. I got a teaching degree and started volunteer coaching at the elementary and middle school level, and found that I really enjoyed that mentorship, and it offered a similar mentorship to teaching in coaching. So yeah, I knew that long term that I would probably be teaching or coaching or both. And when we moved to Victoria, I started volunteering at UVic, and the head coach then, Brent Fogner, was the first one to give me the opportunity to really be autonomous as a coach, and trusted me enough to work with some athletes and program and do some team speeches, and just be on the line with the athletes and see them through for the season. So that sparked my interest to say, like, I could do this at the university level, which is such for me, it was an impactful level in my life, and I see the opportunity there to have that impact at that age group. So yeah, it's been great.
Oh, that's excellent. And again, a couple of other themes you pulled out there. Was that relationship between teaching and coaching, and we see that so often. Not always the case, but we see it often with our coaches, that they have a teaching background or are currently teachers. And I know some of that's just the flexibility with classes ending in the middle of the afternoon that allows for people to coach in the evening. But I think the two are more synonymous that way in terms of just what it takes to be a good coach is obviously being a great teacher. And so yeah, that's great there. Thanks, Hilary. And then Kurt, over to you.
Yeah, I think Hilary mentioned something there that kind of resonated with me. I'm a teacher by trade as well, elementary school also. And when I was done, I didn't necessarily want to coach. I wasn't sure, I wanted to be involved in track at all when I was done competing. And to me, I thought about it a little bit differently. I thought, I enjoy athletics. I enjoy sports. I'm actively involved at the elementary school. Maybe I'll look at going to another sport. Maybe just not the one that I had been doing. So I actually started looking at basketball, and I started coaching a little bit more basketball and doing that sort of stuff. I would take the JV kids, I would take, the 5s and 6s as well, and I would just work with them. Every recess, I'd basically be in the gym shooting hoops, and I really wasn't, I didn't really want anything to do with track at that specific point in time. So to say that I wanted to coach, yeah, I definitely knew I wanted to coach. And I enjoyed the time doing it. I just didn't know if it was that I wanted it to be specifically track. I was just really enjoying spending the time with basketball and doing that at that particular point in time. But as Hilary said, I think that I enjoyed my time in the elementary school. I enjoyed, working with the kids, and I think that that's what kept me, involved enough to later on find that I did want to spend time coaching, track and field.
That's great.
Yeah,
it's kind of
teaching as well, secondary and elementary. Yeah. So,
Okay.
well, like Amy, I didn't want to be stuck in a classroom. Unfortunately, I wanted to get out.
Right.
My teaching as well as possible. So I enjoy that aspect of it. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, we've actually just had a comment come in from someone on the call here today that coaching is teaching, teaching is leadership, and yeah, that's definitely true there. So that's great, and it's interesting to see how all of you have kind of had that in your life there. You guys have kind of touched on it a little bit each, but the next question I kind of want to ask is whether or not how you knew when it was time to leave the sport as an athlete and make that transition to coaching. I know probably for some of you it may have been based on an Olympic cycle, or Charles, you mentioned that there was no more funding, so the decision was made for you. But I'm sure maybe for Jamie and Kurt, and was there a defined time that it was, maybe it was graduation from university, but that you needed to make that transition, or did you struggle with that a little bit? And then probably from an identity standpoint, as much as anything, that changing that the cap you're wearing from being the athlete and moving on to that coaching role. So maybe over to you, Jamie, to talk a bit about that and what was your experience like that?
Yeah, I think the year that I graduated, I actually the best season of my life was my second last year in track, but the last year wasn't a great one. I guess my focuses had shifted a little bit. I got married just before the beginning of my final year. I was 25 at that point, and then we had our first kid on the way. So it was hard. Yeah, I think I was just kind of burnt out of with track, and I think that year, even though I didn't love being away from track for that time, I think it was necessary because of the burnout. And then, yeah, my life was just taking a different path. It wasn't logical for me to continue training at that point. So yeah, it was for me. It was a pretty easy decision at that time.
Right. What about you, Kurt?
Mine was a little bit of an injury. As I mentioned, I switched over to the jumps, and I was starting to have a little bit more success in the jumps than in the sprints. And I think I'd finished maybe like 4th at nationals in the long, or I think, and maybe 5th in a triple or something. And I was like, okay, some things are starting to click. I had discovered the weight room, which, you know, I didn't really do much of that as an athlete. I ended up tearing an ACL, having a pretty gruesome knee injury. And, you know, when I decided to when I came back from it, it took about 12 or 13 months to rehab. And, you know, I started to train again, but I was already in teacher's college. And it just became a little bit more difficult to continue training. And, you know, obviously all the demands of you know, doing all my practicals and that sort of stuff, and with teaching. So I just, you know, I kind of made the decision to be done, you know, and at that point I figured, you know what, I'm going to be coaching anyway. I'm just going to spend time doing basketball. So, you know, that was kind of, you know, my, decision or TSN turning point, where I was like, okay, well, I'm done, you know.
Yeah. And Hilary and Charles, maybe Hilary first, but probably a little bit more around Olympic cycles and that sort of thing, or what was your process in making that transition?
Yeah, for me, it was a challenging one. It probably took me about a year to get over or to conclude. So, and I think that was a large part situational, in that I ended on a disappointing note in Rio, and that I didn't move through the rounds. And so that's hard when you don't end on a high note. I don't know how often you get to end on a high note, right? Usually there's reasons to end it, but that was a challenging one because I'd been really fit leading in, but I was also 35 and my body was starting to break down more. And I also noticed that I wanted more breaks mentally and physically in the year. And that was showing me that it was starting to be time to pull back. And I had one kid and wanted another one. So there's a lot of life things that made it easier to say that I think it was time to take a step back. I mean, we're seeing athletes compete much later into their 30s, and it's awesome to see. And I still run and love the sport, but I think there was a natural transition where it was like, okay, this is the end of the Olympic cycle. I'm definitely not going to go to 2020, and I think that it's time to pull back. And I had an opportunity to become a full-time assistant coach at that time. So there was just some natural transitions there that made sense.
And I think you mentioned the word, or maybe there was a year there where you struggled a little bit, and maybe talk about that just quickly. And that's probably that leaving the sport and an athlete, and then, you know, losing that identity probably a little bit.
Totally, yeah. It's just like, okay, I have this passion that is gone. There's a bit of a missing piece to my life. Like, what am I training for now? Like, why am I going out for runs? And I had to come to grips with the training to compete versus training to just train for life and enjoy it. Not to say that, you know, I didn't want to do some road races or whatnot, but it really is a difference. And also just then appreciating the luxury to not have to go out when the weather's crap and go to the track and have to hit the workouts and hit the times. It's throw the watch away, and I'm going camping this weekend and I don't care if I don't run. Like, there was just that process that took some time, because you have this one dimensional focus where you have to do it by the books to be a really dedicated athlete, and sometimes letting that go is letting what you feel like is your identity go. But I think it's just a transition period where you have to find some purpose in other things, and give yourself a break to have balance in your life, and that's hard coming from the athlete focus.
Oh, that's great. Charles, again, you mentioned it earlier, the finances played a role to it, probably an Olympic cycle. Anything else kind of play into that transition?
Quick, Hilary, pretty impressive. Took it at 35, man. I wanted to push it to 40. In fact, I can still jump over hurdles now if I have to. I had in my mind that I was probably gonna, be in 2012. Made 04, missed 08. China, got injured, and I really felt, hey, you know what? I can take it to 2012. But I'm telling you, as hard as I worked to achieve the support and funding that I did receive, 2 to 3 jobs at the same time, part-time jobs, while being in grad school and assistant coaching, and I would go to the track and take a nap before my workout. I mean, I was grinding pretty hard. I don't even know how I did it. I feel like I'm still recovering from all that I did back then. It's crazy, but for me, when I lost my funding, it was like, okay, there's no way I can go back to that, and there's no way I see myself being successful at an international level, and trying to be, because my goal was to get back to the Olympics. I made the finals in 04, finished 6th, and I was like, I need to be back here. I can do this. And I was like, there's no way I'm getting back there. And if I can't aim that high, I'm sorry. I have to let it go.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, so something that kind of came up, and I don't know if I have heard anyone talk about it, but maybe you guys did. But did anyone actually begin coaching while they were still an athlete? Like Hilary, were you doing any coaching at all while you were?
Yeah, I was doing like some part-time coaching since 2013 through 2016. But I was lucky because Brent was really understanding that I was still competing and traveling. And so I would, in the U Sport varsity season, or CIS then, that's cross country and indoors. So it wasn't a major season for us. And so I would do a bit of assistant coaching at that time.
Right. Kurt, you were nodding your head. Were you doing a little bit as well?
Yeah, I did at the University of Windsor. There's a bunch of Lancer summer camps, and that's kind of where I started. I did, every summer we would do, because I worked in campus rec at the time. So, I would start with those camps. We do the all sport, the track and field one, etc. So that's kind of where I started. I got, at least my feet wet with coaching there.
Right. And Jamie or Charles, was it new? Was there any coaching while you were still an athlete, or just after?
I think Jamie, you did, right?
Yeah, I did a little bit from kind of the age of 15 up.
Oh, yeah.
I was just
But
writing
nothing on a me.
man. People like the fact that I started coaching myself, and I was a bit successful in doing that, and people just wanted me to write programs. So I would write programs for people not knowing, whether they were doing it and how well they were doing it. When they would come back and give me an update or result, I'm like, you're not running hard enough. You're not doing I dabbled in just writing programs for people at the time when I was still competing. So.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, just the next question here is just kind of talking about the own coaches that you guys had throughout your own career, and what sort of influence they had, and whether or not they encouraged you to stay in the sport, and whether they did that purposefully, or if it was more subtle, that you just saw this person and you felt like they inspired you to be a coach themselves. So yeah, interesting to hear just kind of your own experience with the coaches, and I'm sure you've had a couple throughout your life, and what role they had in terms of encouraging you to be a coach. So maybe we just heard from Charles. Let's go down to Kurt and hear from you.
Yeah. Again, like I mentioned, I had some pretty good coaches in high school. At the school we went to, a lot of athletes that moved on to Division I scholarships, Division II scholarships, some that even left track and ended up playing some professional sports. And then when I came to the University of Windsor, we had some pretty good coaches here as well, with Dennis and Brett and Donnie and O'Brien Gibbons. So there was some pretty good coaches in our area here as well. But for me, I think it wasn't so much that they push me to stay in the sport or influence me to stay in the sport. I think of it more a little bit differently in that I think that as an athlete, I always thought, there was a little bit more for me. If I always seemed to come around to events or things that I was doing a little bit later, and had I been introduced to a concept or something else, a skill or a trait a little bit sooner, maybe I would have had a little bit more success. So, kind of when I started, it was more along the lines of not that they pushed me or influenced me, but it was more along the lines of maybe I can find the next type of athlete like me, and maybe I can get that message across to them a little bit sooner, so that maybe they can progress a little bit further on than I did. So that's kind of how I think I looked at it at that point.
Right. Great. Hilary, what about you?
Yeah, I think I've had lots of coaching influences. I've had a long career, and at every stage in my athletic career, I've had some really positive experiences. My high school coach, Mark McDonald, went to Windsor, and he was great in developing me and keeping it fun, but also competitive and exposing me to the appropriate level of competitive atmosphere. So I think that was great. And then my university coach was like a Renaissance man. I told these guys in our debrief, he used to play the accordion on the bus, the team bus, when it was somebody's birthday. And, he taught us about life and also about strategy. And he had a different style of coaching, a European style of coaching. So that influenced me. And then, yeah, I guess Dave Scott Thomas was my coach for the majority of my career, and I had very positive influences from him. And unfortunately, that's turned negative when we've learned of the unfortunate situation that everyone knows about with Dave. That's really hard and was extremely sad for us to learn about. And so you get the good and the bad, and it's, for me, that was difficult to learn that not everybody had the same positive experience I had. But I think all of us as coaches can agree that you learn what a responsibility we have in creating a safe environment for athletes and creating trust in our athletes. And if we can't do that, then we failed them and we failed the sport. So that's so important, and you learn from that. And then the coach probably that's had the biggest influence on my coaching career then is Brent, because he's given me the experience and the opportunity to coach now at the university level. So I think some ups and downs and some challenges, but overall my coaching experience has been very positive from an athlete perspective and coach perspective.
No, that's great, and important to to point out the positives and negatives. And I think probably all of us have had certain coaches that we learn more from than others, and yeah, you do learn as much from the negatives as you do the positives, and the key there is learning from them. So that's great, and thanks for bringing that up. Jamie, over to you.
Yeah, I think similar to Kurt, part of it, like I had a mixture of good coaches, bad coaches in between, and one thing was to try and get to people earlier on, to kind of stop them from having. I know a lot of people do learn from experience, but if you can get there and kind of help them along their way before they make all the mistakes that you have made, like that's pretty valuable, I think. So yeah, I had a lot of different coaches. I had some very high level ones, a guy who's now Steve Rippon is his name, working in Finland, and he's produced a couple of Olympians in pole vault, so I had a lot of good technical stuff coming from him. And I had another coach who would lecture on biomechanics and stuff, and back in Glasgow, and so he was a real theory guy. And then but for me, the big impact was when I came to Canada, and Rob Pike was my coach for 3 years, and he was the one that hired me, and I worked with him for a year here. And he was the one that just kind of, it was more about just performance for him. Like, yeah, I may have had very good technical coaches, but they maybe didn't move far beyond that. Whereas moving out to Canada and not really knowing anyone here, Rob became kind of a role model for me, and he would kind of help me through different struggles in life, not just my struggles to jump higher or run faster. So I began to realize that you can really impact people's lives, and yeah, not everyone's going to become an Olympian, but you can help them reach their potential. And I think that's what he really taught me.
No, that's great. And what we're hearing from this, and it's probably, I'll go back to all of you guys and get that, is this role of this mentor is kind of coming out of here. And I'm kind of curious to know, and we'll go back to the other ones. I still want to hear from Charles on this, but in talking about the role of a mentor currently and ongoing, and whether or not that's something you continue to have. It sounds like what we're talking is kind of looking in the past and what sort of role your coaches played then, but there is that other part to it in terms of that continued growth right now. So we'll come to that next. Charles, talk a bit about your own coaches and the role and the influence they had.
I'll speak to 3 coaches I had in college real quick, and strange, we go through having three different coaches, but Keith Barnier, Ralph White, and Charles Foster. I studied everything these guys did. Their coaching philosophy, how they were as coaches, all those things I really, at the time was analyzing and taking in. And, from Keith, he would get down in the trenches with you. I mean, I remember this guy used to stretch the athletes at the end of practice, and I thought he was crazy, but those stretches felt really good after he was done. So I got that aspect of, you want the athletes to succeed and stuff like that. Being in the trenches with them is really important. Ralph White, mental toughness. I remember it was pouring rain. I don't remember if it was lightning, but it was pouring rain, and we were like, "Oh, there's no, we're having practice today, coach. We're going back to our dorms or whatever." And he said, "No, man, get your gear. We're running some 400s." And we're like, "What, coach? Are you crazy?" He's like, "Let's go." We had to stand off for a while, but eventually we ran those 400s, and lo and behold, we got to indoor NCAA championships indoors 4x4, and he said, "Man, you're mentally tough. You're better than anybody out here. Go out there and do what you know you can." And we won the championship, mental toughness. So I learned that from him. And then Charles Foster, he's like, "Go run those hurdles. If your legs are hitting them, you'll just stop hitting them. You'll figure something out." And he was the kind of coach that stood back and identified stuff, and he's like, "You got to figure it out." So I learned a lot from those collegiate coaches at Clemson.
That's great. So talking about, switching gears and talking about that role of mentorship now, and whether that's something you actively pursue and seek out, and some people will actually go through an apprenticeship program, and I know Hilary, you did something like that, and that was actually more of a formal program. But a lot of cases, a mentorship is going to be much more informal, and it may just be, again, calling up your old coach and hacking it up and touching base on whatever it is, training philosophies or principles. But I'm curious with all 4 of you whether or not that's something you continue to look out and seek for, and what that looks like. So maybe we'll go down to Kurt.
Yeah. So my mentorship sort of process was, I'm going to say it took me a little while to develop it. I'll say it that way. I was asked a lot of questions. I always wanted a lot of information. And I think sometimes with coaches, they're willing to give you a lot of information. Some are not willing to give you information. Some want you to just go out and do it. So I'd probably say at first, there's 2 coaches in Windsor. One was Don Garrett. The other one was Gary Malloy, who passed away a year ago. And he's actually the one that sort of pushed me to become a club coach and be involved in that sort of stuff. But I'd say I would ask the 2 of them a lot of questions initially. And I kind of found that after that, there weren't a lot of coaches in Canada who I could ask a lot of questions to, because in Canada at that time, I felt like it was a lot of, keeping, what you were doing special to yourself, sort of thing in your group. So what I ended up doing was I ended up going to the University of Western and getting to spend some time with Vicky Crowley there. And doing my master's, and that was awesome. I got to see something outside of the city of Windsor and see what what they did in the city of London, and got to work a little bit with her and the athlete group that she had there at that time, and it was a fantastic group. of young athletes. So that was pretty cool. And then after that, I kind of made my own way. What I did was I decided that I wanted to go and see what athletes and coaches look like down south. So I took off. I went to a few schools down south and friends that I had made at World Juniors in 2010. And I went off to Oklahoma, where Dana Boone was, Arkansas, where Travis Geffert was, Miami, Coach Amy Deem, Tulsa. I went to as many schools as I could get to in a short period of time with as much money as I had. Sleep on some couches.
What did that look like? That was a weekend or a week, or
for some of them it was a week.
Yeah.
Some of them it might have been over a weekend at a meet. Some of them it was repeated trips. Some of it was following up with phone calls. What I initially did was just ask for a microcycle of every phase of their training. And, I took a voice recorder and I had to list a couple questions that I wanted to ask them. And that's basically what I did. I think I ended up speaking to 10 coaches. And I mean, it's been great for me because from there, I've been able to get names of other coaches and talk to them, ask them questions, help me problem solve, and make really good relationships with them. So that's probably what I would say my mentorship looked like at the beginning and a little bit of it now.
Oh, that's great. I like hearing that. That's yeah, I mean, obviously it takes initiative and financial backing to go and do those sorts of things, but I'm sure they've proved dividends in the long run too. And some of those relationships, I imagine you would continue, onwards.
Yeah.
And great. Hilary, I know you mentioned, Brent was probably one of the main figures in your career, but maybe Heather as well. What about going forward in terms of, your mentorship and who you look to and whether that's something you still actively do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's Kurt brings up a good point that you want to get out of what you know. And so for the majority of my career, I would always even ask athletes what kind of training they're doing. But what you learn is you can't just take a snippet of what somebody does, like one workout, and think that that workout's going to make you run this time. So yeah, you got to study and ask questions about the whys. And so that's something that I've pursued in asking different coaches. So yeah, Heather Henniger has been great. She's mentored me when I helped out at the West Hub. And Mike Van Tegum has been like a really great mentor. He's such a great person and teaches you a lot about the whole athlete. And so he's been awesome. And Melindy Elmer and I are good friends, and he coached her for a long time. So I got to learn a lot about the ways that the training principles, the philosophies, the leadership styles. And, that's what you learn is each coach has different styles, and you need to learn your own style and maybe also adapt to the different athletes. So I try to have coaching calls with different coaches to ask questions. I think 2 weeks ago I was on the phone for 2 hours with Mark Bamba, just exchanging ideas and learning from what his principles are, which he pulls from tons of different people. And then I have the fortunate, I guess I get to learn from my husband, Trent, who is a physiologist, and I can ask him questions, and he had a big part in coaching me in most of my career as well. So if I want to know about training principles, I can, walk upstairs and ask some questions.
Around the kitchen
so
table.
That yeah, that's a nice, nice perk to having somebody who's very knowledgeable and can answer lots of questions. But he's also really learned a lot from different coaches of different sports too, and to understand what rowing is doing and the training mileage that they do versus what we can do in track and field. And so I think pulling from other sports, you can learn stuff too. So yeah, it's just talking to as many people and watching what coaches do. I recommend watching the documentary on Michael Jordan to watch Phil Jackson and his philosophy. Like, it is, you learn a lot from watching coaches.
Yeah. And in different areas, that's a really good point to sometimes look outside our own little sandbox and see what other coaches and other disciplines or other leaders, and really in any part of the world too. I mean, it might be from business or otherwise. That's great. Jamie, I know you mentioned Rob as your mentor. I don't know if he continues. He's not with you at TWU anymore, but has someone else stepped into that role, or what's the mentorship look like for you?
Yeah, so actually when I called Rob when he left, he said don't worry about going forward. Like whenever you need anything, come over, pick up the phone or whatever. So he continues on as a mentor. That our new head coach here, Shane, very almost the opposite of Rob. So he has a bigger impact on kind of different leadership qualities and stuff like that. And then yeah, big part of the reason I got into track and field to begin with was my dad. So he started coaching about 15 years ago. So that's one of the people like me and him just like we probably watched you, Charles, in 2004. Uh, we'd be watching every heat, every semi-final, every final, and yeah, so he's having some great success, especially with multi-eventers in the UK. So we go back and forth. He likes to talk more than he likes to listen, but it's still we get to share a lot of information there. And I think yeah, there's different. I think the world of pole vault is it's pretty tight knit. So I've met a lot of kind of world renowned coaches in that field, and they're willing to communicate and can send videos and stuff. So there's mentorship that way. And I think what Hilary touched on is just, I think if you have a mindset that you're never going to know it all, and whether you talk to someone like someone that's on this call and you can get this huge wealth of knowledge from them, or if you talk to someone that maybe coaches track as a hobby one night a week, there's still going to be stuff that you can share with them, and there's definitely going to be stuff that you can take from what they do to make your own program and your own coaching higher quality. So yeah, man, I think mentors is like having individual mentors that you really dive deep into things, but also just being open and not thinking you know it all is, I think, is very valuable.
Yeah,
there too.
Yeah, that's great. I always heard the one line that if you go to like any sort of seminar, coaching seminar, and you walk out and someone says, you know, that they that's great, it just reaffirmed everything I already knew. You didn't learn anything, and that's not a good way to go. You need to have a you know, that growth mindset of looking for ways to improve. Charles, just cognizant of the time, we only got about 10 minutes or so to go here, and we do have a question that would work well to put towards you from the audience. And the question is just around on how much on being a high performance athlete helps you being a successful coach. Do you see often drawing from your experience as a high performance athlete to what you're doing day to day?
Absolutely. You know, and I'm gonna again at the highest level possible, Olympics and World Championship. When it comes to, for example, I use Crystal, putting the plan together for Crystal to compete at that level. I, you know, don't want to leave any stones unturned. So we talk about everything from mental performance and readiness to, you know, what she needs to do on the track to, you know, if she's running 200 meters, at every point in that race that she know what needs to happen. So, and I was able to develop, you know, my philosophy around that, being very technical, just because of my background and what I dealt with as an international athlete. And I'm sure Hilary, you two can speak to that, you know, but definitely it has helped tons along with my teaching background as well.
Right. And so the follow-up question is whether or not you need to be a success or a high performance athlete in order to be a successful coach. And I'm going to go out and say the answer is probably no. We've got lots of examples of high performance athletes. Like Wayne Gretzky is probably a good one, you know, that didn't really make it as a coach. And we've got lots of, you know, so-called mediocre athletes that have gone on to be fantastic coaches. And an example would be Phil Jackson, as you mentioned earlier. But interesting, maybe go to Kurt to get kind of a different example. Obviously, Charles and Hilary come from the Olympic side, and Kurt, you guys didn't quite hit that level. What's your experience in terms of maybe not having experienced something like the Olympic Games, but now coaching athletes at that level?
I think what you want to do is you want to be as diligent as possible in preparing any athlete. And I think in order to do that, one of the things that Charles said that was fantastic is leaving no stone unturned. And in doing that, I think that means that you have to look through the lens of the elite athlete. So that may mean contacting someone or talking to someone who was or who has coached elite athletes before. Ask them how they did it. Talk to them about how they prepared. And you know, my quick snippet on that would be 2 years ago, I had an athlete that ran everything up to the 600 meters, and we were trying to also prepare for World Indoors at the same time, as well as U Sport and OUAs conference-wise. And you know, I leaned on Coach Boo, and he said you have to run a triplet. And I was like, you know, what on God's green earth is a triplet? He's like, you have to race 3 weekends in a row because that's exactly going to be the same type of race situation that you're going to have. And you're going to have to do multiple races per weekend. You know, and I said, okay. So I put together training and a plan that matched that. You know, I think the other thing you might have to do is look at something along the lines of, you know, talking to elite therapists, elite physiology, as Hilary mentioned, talking to someone like, you know, for instance, Trent, you know, a physiology person, a nutritionist, you know, obviously maybe even talking to someone in the head coaching realm, like a Glenn Roy or you know, someone like that. So that you gain as much intel as possible in formulating that plan in order to do exactly what you know, you might not have been able to do yourself. You know, so I've drawn on people like Charles as well. You know, I've asked him about things that he's done in situations when he's been in a final or, you know, or preparing for a final. You know, and I think that's the best, you know, logical way to go about it.
Yep. Look to try to find ways to fill those gaps. That's great.
Yeah.
Just again, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to just keep moving forward here. The last question, I'll kind of try to roll a few together, is just talking about kind of formal training. We've kind of talked a lot about experience as an athlete, mentors, and your own personal coaches and those influences they've had on your career as a coach. But talk just briefly about kind of the more formal training, sort of professional development that you maybe seek out. So there's the National Coaching Certification Plan, or program, sorry, the NCCP. Imagine you guys have all gone through some levels of that. So maybe talk just briefly of kind of where that's fit into your education as a coach, and then maybe also what other professional development you've seeked out and whether you take part in courses or is it you know, reading materials or anything like that. Maybe we'll go down to Hilary and have you kind of touch base on just kind of what your formal training as a coach has looked like.
Yeah, so as I said, I have a teaching degree, which kind of starts the formal process, I think, but from an NCCP level. Chris, I think you and I were in my first coaching course, where BC Athletics gave the opportunity for athletes to have some coach training. And so we did, I think, level 1 and 2 together. And that was the first NCCP course I took, and I've gone on to do level 3 with Mike Van Tighem as my mentor coach in the the portfolio, and then Heather Henniger in the environment. So that's the formal part of it, and I think it's really important to go through because it makes you reflect on your coaching styles and organizational skills. But I also think that seeking out other people, like we've all talked about, and asking questions is important, and listening to these webinars of different people and how they operate is great. So you never stop learning, and I think everyone can agree on that. And you need to just ask questions and reach out to people. And there's right now tons of too many things out there. But I've read and try to keep up with coaching books to learn different philosophies, because I think when you come at it as an athlete, you have to realize that what worked for you isn't going to work for every athlete. And so you have to develop different styles for different types of individuals to see what works for them and develop that and learn what is outside of what you knew.
That's great. Not to put you on the spot, is there a one book that you go to often or anything like that you would suggest to the audience?
I use Jack Daniels like tables a lot for pacing. In terms of books, I've read Coe's book, and I've looked at different philosophies, but I would say the one that I use a lot would be Jack Daniels tables, because it's really well studied and you can give athletes some paces on. Yeah.
That's great. Jamie, I'll go over to you just to talk quickly about your the formal side of your coach education.
Yeah, I just did the performance coach over the last year or so, and I think it's a great framework. I think there's so much outside of there that you kind of do your learning, but it's a great way to check that you're kind of ticking all these boxes, that you're able to put together an annual plan and you're able to explain why you're doing certain things, why you periodize certain ways and stuff. It's a great way to kind of them to check that you're ready to go out there and lead sessions and lead athletes at, say, the university level through an entire season and stuff like that. it's great for that. Yeah, especially during quarantine, and I don't know, a bit of a nerd with this stuff, but I love researching. I actually, when I met with Derek Evely about a year and a bit ago, he was like, "You just need to stop for a while. You're just like, your brain's saturated, like just." So I think that's an important lesson. There's a ton of knowledge out there. You need to kind of know where you're going to look and not try and incorporate everything, but you also need time to kind of experiment with what you are learning and see how your athletes react, and maybe take a break from just constantly trying to learn and learn how to apply it better than that. So I think that's been an important lesson for me, actually, that I could share. In terms of specifics, I've always been a huge, like in the UK, so Dan Paff, for example, was there, and from I think around 2009 to 2012, and I've always followed his stuff. If you look at my programs, there's a huge influence from him, and also Dan was Rob's mentor through his master's program. So yeah, huge influence from there. I think Derek Evely with programming is invaluable, the stuff I've learned through there. Yeah, Charlie Francis, people like that. Altus, so through the Dan and Derek idea, Altus has some great courses out there that I've been through. I'd highly recommend those. Sure.
That's great. I'm looking at, we're 2:02, so we're probably going to wrap up here. They did have one final question, so I'll put it to Kurt and to Charles. What's more mentally draining, coaching or competing? Charles?
Coaching.
Coaching. Kurt?
Hands down, coaching.
Okay, so the athletes have it easy.
People don't see the behind the scene work that goes in preparing for coaching. I think all you coaches can attest to that. The behind the scene work is unbelievable if you want to get it right.
Oh, that's great,
Yeah,
guys.
you also have
So yeah,
the emotions of so many different athletes, not just yourself,
That's
right.
right.
The
That's
ups
right.
and downs. You got to learn, to try to keep it even. But
yeah, I always felt bad for coaches because it felt like, there was never a day where you had, all 5, 10 of whatever your athletes that all had personal bests or, hit their goals for the day, so you always had one or two that, drag it down. Okay, guys, I think we'll call it there. It's just after 2:00. I do want to say thank you to all 4 of you for taking your time to, share with us your experiences and, all your learnings along the way. And hopefully everyone that was in attendance, gained a lot from this. Just a reminder to everyone that it's been recorded and you guys can go back and view this. We posted under the Athletics Canada e-training tab on their website there. And again, just thank you to you all. And yeah, we'll probably call it there.
Thanks,
all right,
Chris.
thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.